It began with a rental, a small cabin sitting just beyond a creek tucked behind rows of sycamore trees, far from the main road. It looked harmless, the kind of place meant for quiet weekends and phone detoxes, the kind of place advertised with words like peaceful and secluded. The first few days were uneventful. The air was still, the water shallow, the sound of insects almost hypnotic at night. But there was a house across the creek, barely visible through the trees. It wasn't listed on the property map, and when viewed closely, it looked abandoned. The windows were boarded from the inside, and the roof sagged in the middle. Yet sometimes at night, a dim orange light flickered behind the boards, faint, rhythmic, like the glow of a candle or a television screen left on static. It was easy to dismiss at first. Old wiring, reflection, maybe another visitor. But the pattern continued. Every night, at roughly the same hour, the light would appear, sometimes higher, as if someone were walking upstairs. Sometimes it vanished suddenly, like it had been covered by a hand. Days passed, and the curiosity grew unbearable. The distance across the creek was short, no more than 30 feet, but thick mud and uneven rocks made it a difficult cross. On the fourth evening, after the light appeared again, the decision was made to look closer. The sound of water and crickets masked every step until the other side was reached. Up close, the house reeked of something faint but unpleasant, not decay, but dampness mixed with old food and mildew. The boards across the windows weren't nailed evenly. Some looked recently replaced, others old and cracked. Around the back, an open crawl space led beneath the house. There were no footprints, no tire marks, no sign anyone had been there recently. Then came the sound, faint, scraping, rhythmic, like fabric brushing wood. It came from beneath the crawl space. Looking down, the dirt floor was disturbed, soft in some places, compacted in others. A piece of string or rope extended from one of the boards, half buried. When pulled, it resisted slightly before giving way. It was attached to something heavy, something wrapped, something that didn't move on its own. The smell grew stronger. A dark, wet patch clung to the soil. Every instinct screamed to leave. The string was dropped, and the water was crossed again as fast as possible. That night, the light across the creek didn't appear. By morning, a decision was made to report it to the nearest sheriff's office. The drive took almost an hour through backroads and farmland. The deputy who listened took notes but didn't react much. He said the property across the creek had been foreclosed years ago, belonged to a man who went missing during the winter floods. No one had bought it since. He promised to send someone to check, but nothing ever came of it. No follow-up call, no mention on the news. Weeks later, a listing appeared online. A cabin for sale, reduced price, creek access. In one of the photos, far in the background, through the trees, the house across the creek stood still, and in one window, behind a new set of boards, faint light bled through the cracks.
The job was supposed to be simple. 2 floors, one aging security system, and a few weeks of post-renovation cleanup before the demolition crew arrived. Old Crestview High had been abandoned for nearly a decade before the city decided to tear it down. Its replacement was already half built next door. Modern, bright, sterile. But the old building lingered like something that refused to die. They said the place used to flood in heavy rain. They said there were bats in the rafters, asbestos in the ceilings, rats in the ducts. But what they never said What nobody ever mentioned in the job description was how the silence moved there, how it breathed. The night shift started at 10, always 10. The two cleaners signed in at the temporary trailer near the parking lot, collected their supplies, and entered through the back maintenance door. The lights buzzed to life in fractured patterns, a few working fluorescents scattered among dead ones, leaving most of the hallways washed in shadows. The first few nights were predictable: mopping, vacuuming, emptying trash, wiping dust off long-forgotten lockers. The air smelled of rot and disinfectant. The security monitors hummed softly in the corner of the supply room. 4 small black and white feeds from the few cameras that still functioned. Every sound had a place: the squeak of mop wheels, the dull drone of old bulbs, the distant groan of the boiler that hadn't been fully drained. Everything predictable. Until one night, something shifted. It began with movement. Faint, almost imperceptible. A shadow caught at the edge of one of the monitors, a blur crossing the stairwell on the east wing. Small, fast, not quite human, not quite anything else. The camera flickered, static slicing through the image for just a moment, but long enough to see something was there. They checked the stairwell. Nothing. No wind, no open doors, just the lingering smell of dust and metal and something faintly sweet, like spoiled fruit. But that was only the beginning. The next night, when the cafeteria was cleaned, a few chairs had been moved. Not much, just enough to make you doubt your memory. Rows of neatly aligned seats broken by one facing the wrong direction. Subtle, wrong, unsettling. Later, a garbage bin was found upright in the middle of the hall, the trash bag missing. Another night, the supply closet door was left ajar, even though it was always locked. You could reason away the first few incidents. Cameras glitch, air currents move things people forget. But the pattern grew, slowly, deliberately. A clock missing from the wall, a mop propped against the wrong corner. Then came the smell. Faint at first, then heavy, a sharp metallic tang near the old gymnasium. That same week, the night janitor mopped a hallway on the first floor, polished to a perfect sheen, and turned around to see a trail of wet footprints crossing the floor, bare feet, human, adult-sized. The steps were slow and deliberate, each perfectly formed in the thin layer of water. They led toward the maintenance stairs and ended halfway down. Not faded, not smeared, ended. Security was notified the next morning. A man was sent from the main office 2 towns over to review the tapes. But by the time he arrived, the footage was gone, overwritten by the 24-hour loop. The man shrugged. Probably condensation, he said. Maybe kids sneaking in through a broken window. He left before midnight. But the cleaner noticed something after he was gone. The man's shoes had left faint tracks in the hallway dust. But there was another set, following a few feet behind him, smaller, bare. By the next week, the smell had changed. No longer metallic. It was thicker, older, the unmistakable stench of bleach covering something far worse. It came from the gym. Inside, the air was colder than the rest of the building. One wall, the far one near the bleachers, had been scrubbed nearly raw. Layers of paint stripped away until only cracked plaster remained. And beneath that, carved into the surface, were markings, numbers, uneven, erratic, carved by hand. The earliest date was 1996. The latest, the current year. No report was filed. The foreman didn't want delays. He said old schools collect graffiti and ghost stories like mold. But that night, the cleaner couldn't stop thinking about those numbers. The way the plaster looked freshly gouged. The way the bleach didn't quite mask the coppery odor underneath. Each night after that, the gym lights flickered without cause. The hum of the fixtures changed pitch, as if reacting to something unseen. The cameras caught nothing but static when pointed toward that wall. And sometimes, faintly, from somewhere deep within the empty building, there was the sound of water dripping, even though the pipes had long been shut off. Then came the night the power failed. The outage lasted less than 2 minutes, but the generator lights came on with a low hum, soft red emergency glow flooding the hallways. The cleaner froze by the stairwell, flashlight trembling. In that dim light, the air looked almost thick, like heat rising from pavement. When the power returned, the first thing seen was the reflection on the freshly mopped floor, a long streak, as though something wet had been dragged across it, from the gym doors toward the supply room. That was the last night the cleaner worked alone. A second worker was added for safety, but the building seemed to react to their presence. The smell spread through the halls. The clocks ticked out of sync. And somewhere, always at the edge of hearing, came the faint echo of footsteps when neither of them moved. They finished the contract 2 weeks later. The demolition crew arrived soon after. During teardown, one of the excavators broke through the floor near the old gym basement. Underneath was a narrow crawl space, unlisted on the blueprints. Inside were scattered bones, small enough to belong to children. The police were called, reports filed, but everything was quietly handled. The site was sealed within a day. No public statement was released. Months later, the new school opened. Shiny floors, bright classrooms, no trace of the old one left except the foundation buried deep beneath fresh concrete. The cleaning company moved to another district. The last janitor never spoke of Crestview again. But when the new staff moved into their break room, they found something waiting. Inside one of the metal lockers, the one assigned to the Night Custodian, was a small yellowed envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a faded photograph, the old gym wall, the numbers carved into it. But this time, beneath the last row of dates, another set of marks had appeared. Fresh, scratched deep enough to break plaster. And beneath, written in red ink, a single line. Not all of them were found.
In the early 2000s, an independent researcher named Owen Mallory began a quiet, obscure project for a state university, documenting ambient soundscapes across America. His purpose was simple: to record the changing sound of the natural world. He wanted the static of rural highways, the hum of power lines, the slow rhythm of insects at night, the way silence wasn't truly silent anymore, how every valley and field carried the distant pulse of civilization. He traveled alone, state by state, carrying 2 condenser microphones, a small recorder, and a notebook full of coordinates. He called it the Acoustic Archive. Most nights were unremarkable. Hours of wind, frogs, crickets, faint static, the ordinary murmur of the earth when it's left alone. Until one night, in late August of 2003, deep in a rural valley, the pattern broke. The location wasn't special. An overgrown field near an abandoned grain elevator, surrounded by skeletal trees and forgotten fencing. The nearest town was 10 miles away. The elevator had been closed since the 70s. A tall concrete tower with its windows bricked and its machinery rusted into silence. Locals said the ground around it was unstable, that drainage tunnels from old mills ran underneath. But Owen didn't care about the folklore. The emptiness made for clean audio. He arrived before sunset, set up the microphone on a short tripod, shielded it from wind with foam, and calibrated the recorder. Then he marked the coordinates and left, intending to retrieve it in the morning. Everything looked normal when he returned. The battery full, no damage, the LED light blinking steadily. Even the dust on the casing was undisturbed. Back at his apartment that afternoon, he transferred the files to his computer, labeling them as Field Session Number 27. The first 4 hours of audio were typical. Wind through grass, the faint hum of distant machinery, an occasional passing car miles away. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the texture changed. A metallic sound entered. Faint, dragging, uneven. It wasn't rhythmic like machinery, but slow and deliberate, like metal scraping through dirt. A few seconds of silence. Then again, closer. Each pull seemed heavier than the last, as though something was being forced through the soil. It continued for nearly 20 minutes, stopping only to resume slightly nearer to the microphone each time. At first, Owen assumed it was an animal, maybe a deer caught on wire or a broken fence post swaying. But the cadence was wrong, too deliberate, too slow. Then came the breathing. It was faint at first, barely perceptible beneath the wind, but once noticed, it couldn't be unheard. Human breathing. Shallow, uneven, labored, and unmistakably close to the microphone. There was a soft rustle, grass shifting under weight, then a thump, like something heavy collapsing into soft ground. After that, silence. Long, heavy silence that lasted just under 3 minutes. Then, from the same direction, the sound of shoveling began. Not rhythmic, not rushed. Each movement was slow, deliberate, like earth being moved one shovelful at a time. Wet soil, deep digging. The scraping grew rougher, the breathing louder, occasionally catching, as though the person was talking to themselves just beneath the threshold of hearing, but no words formed clearly. Only noise, low, broken, desperate. At 3:24 a.m., the sound stopped. There was a faint creak, the metallic groan of something old shifting under pressure, followed by a single muffled footstep crushing into grass. Then another, and finally, a sharp impact against the microphone casing, loud enough to distort the audio. The recording ended abruptly. Owen replayed it several times, headphones pressed tight against his ears. Every time the metallic scraping seemed closer, more intentional, as though whoever was out there had known exactly where the microphone was. Still, he was a scientist. Logic had to come first. He assumed interference, wind maybe, a loose bracket, or vibrations from nearby machinery. Yet the field was miles from any active structure. 2 days later, he drove back. The site looked different. The grass around the stand was flattened in a perfect semicircle. 15 feet away, near the base of the grain elevator, the soil had been disturbed. A rectangular patch of earth, darker than the rest. Uneven, freshly refilled. It was roughly 6 feet long. He didn't touch it, didn't take samples. He simply noted it, packed up his equipment, and drove away without looking back. That night, from a payphone, he made an anonymous call to the county sheriff's office describing a possible illegal burial site. He gave the coordinates and hung up. The sheriff's report confirmed the next day what he already knew. Human remains were found beneath the soil. No identification, no missing person matching the description. The case remained unsolved. For a few weeks, Owen couldn't sleep. He stopped recording, stopped traveling. But curiosity, or guilt, eventually pushed him back to the files. He returned to the archive almost a year later, intending to organize and submit them for his research grant. When he reopened the session from that night, he noticed something odd. The waveform of the last hour contained layers of background sound he hadn't heard before. At first, it was just white noise, but after isolating the lower frequencies, new textures emerged. Voices. Faint, distant, human. Not conversation, not words exchanged, just breathing, many breaths overlapping in dissonant rhythms, too many to be a single person. They rose and fell together, forming strange harmonics, almost chanting without language. And underneath them all, one exhalation stretched longer than the rest. A single breath that came closer and closer until it filled the channel, pressing into the silence like a whisker forced through teeth. When slowed down and filtered, it resembled a phrase, not clearly spoken, but suggested by cadence, by rhythm, by something almost intentional. 3 syllables, 2 words. Not again. Owen shut the file. He stared at the waveform frozen on screen, the jagged peaks of the last breath, before deleting the entire archive folder, every session, every backup drive. Then he formatted the computer completely. He never submitted his research. He moved apartments without forwarding his address. For years afterwards, he refused to discuss that night. But the field never returned to silence. Locals said they avoided the area around the elevator at dark. The wind there had a different sound, hollow, resonant, as if moving through a tunnel beneath the earth. On humid nights, they claim, if you stood near the rusted silo doors and listened closely, you could hear faint scraping beneath the soil. Metal on dirt, slow, steady. Sometimes it came with breathing, sometimes with the dull thump of earth falling back into place. And every now and then, the sound would stop abruptly, leaving only the static hum of insects and the soft echo of something just under the surface, trying not to be heard. No one digs there anymore. The county sealed the land for safety. But some say that when wind passes through the empty valley, it carries a low, fractured whisper, almost mechanical, almost human, a voice shaped not by lungs, but by soil pressing against a mouth that shouldn't move. A voice that says, faintly, patiently, not again.